This wasn't something where their goal had shifted or their strategy has shifted. It was, we're out, we're done.
FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. Before you can understand some of the challenges with and why people are, I'll call it, quitting the FIRE movement, let's first understand like what it is and how it even came to be. What are the steps? You first have to know your numbers. So find your numbers, then save aggressively. And I'll kind of detail specifically what that means, but then save aggressively. And once you do that, in order to maintain where you are, you have to adjust your lifestyle. So it's about living below your means. And then lastly, aggressively invest. And the thing that I want you to listen to as we talk about the FIRE movement and why people are leaving it, it's that aggressively invest part is the problem. Because what does investing imply? Because what I don't hear in this list is security. If you're asking me to invest in something, that implies risk. And these are the steps to my financial freedom for the most part. The issue is that it aggressively invest. So finding your numbers, meaning very similar to velocity banking, it's knowing and understanding where you're headed, what's your goal. And so as it relates to finding your numbers, it's, hey, is it 25 to 30 times your income? Most of what I'm seeing is talking about making sure that your numbers should be somewhere around 25 to 30 times your income as a goal. That's your goal number. And then as it relates to saving aggressively, what does that mean? Like, where am I putting my money? And based off the data that I saw, it was somewhere around, I'll call it 50 to 70% saved of your 50 to 70% saved, meaning of your income put away. How realistic is that? How realistic is it for you to take 50 to 75% of your income and put it elsewhere? So when we're talking about save aggressively, what we're talking about is being diligent around, hey, adjusting my lifestyle. And that's kind of the next point, is living below your means, meaning reduce expenses. So if you can reduce your expenses, increase cash flow, and save 50% of what it is you bring home, 50 to 70% of what it is you bring home, you can put yourself in a position to where now you have this large sum where you can aggressively invest. Aggressively invest in what? Where am I putting my money? What I've learned is we're talking about index funds, ETFs, crypto, and the last one being real estate. So ultimately, when you freed up this cash flow, when you freed up this dollar amount, the key is, where do you put it? And so it's the thought process is, hey, I'm going to aggressively invest in using either my employer 401k or employer retirement account to aggressively invest in not just the mutual funds, but I'm switching over to ETFs and index funds. I'm going to reduce my expenses so that I can live under my means, and putting away 50 to 70% of what it is I've saved. And then lastly, it's the understanding your number, and that number being somewhere around 25 to 30% of your times your income, to be able to identify what that number would be. So that's kind of where it starts. So these are the steps to hit your FIRE number and ultimately put yourself in a position to where you can fire your job. All you got to do is do these items. Now, how simple is it for you to put away 50 to 7% of your income? Like, that's challenge number one. And reducing expenses, again, that's velocity banking, right? That is putting yourself in a position where you can increase cash flow. So how do you do that? Identify a debt tool, focus on running income through that debt tool, paying off debt at a significant clip, and then taking that cash flow and putting it to work. But where do you put it to work? And so, and from there, it's kind of just speaking to, and this is not how they framed it, but this is kind of our approach to what FIRE looks like, is you have to identify where it is you're going. And so if I'm spending most of my time at work, the objective is I want to fire my job. I want to put myself in a position to where I am not working for the rest of my life. And if I'm not working for the rest of my life, then the whole objective is to give this period of time. This is that point where I'm spending my time doing what I love, working with my family, living with my family. So the goal is freedom, right? The goal is putting ourselves in a position to where we can have our WTF moment. So I think the goal is really not that different from what it is we preach on this channel as well. Is the objective is, I want to hit my WTF moment. I want to do as little as possible to be able to get there. And I think the piece that's missing from this movement, or was missing from this movement though, is this does not imply any type of machine. Meaning, what is it that's going to allow you to sustain this part of your life. That's a significant amount of time. So what is that vehicle that's going to continue producing for you? Because if we're talking about index funds and ETFs and crypto, there's a lot of, I'll call it, risk there that we just have to pay attention to. So did you actually quit your job, or did this become your job? And then if you kind of look at the approach to the FIRE method, it was very linear. It was, hey, once I'm done with my dinner, then I can have dessert. Meaning I take these steps. Hey, I start saving 50%, 70% of what it is I make. And as I start, hitting these milestones, then I'm going to transition that cash flow into something that would allow me to ultimately hit my goal, which is fire my job. What is it about this process that made it become so popular? So I had to kind of peel back the layers and go, so when did this start? And here's what I learned. This was originally based somewhere around 2010 is when this movement, I'll say, started. And it was based off the fact that the goal was to go against popular culture. So it was based off counterculture. And the idea was this: we live in a society that is filled with excess, greed. People are too comfortable and they're focused on stuff and things. So again, the objective was to go against the grain, go against counterculture. And you know what? We are going to unhandcuff ourselves from corporate, unhandcuff ourselves from this stuff and things. And we're going to reassess what it is we have at our disposal and take a different direction. So to counter the excess, the greed, being too comfortable in the stuff and things, the objective was to be aggressive, be weird, be extreme, be different. And ultimately, fire corporate. Ultimately, put yourself in a position to where you're no longer, I'll call it, dependent upon what's happening at your job. But here's the piece that also what I realized during this time, because again, this date matters. This is 2010 is when this started. What was happening during these, I'll call it this 10-year period from 2010 to 2020? What was going on here? Well, what was going on here was this was in the midst of a pretty significant bull market in the bull rush in the market, meaning the S&P 500. We saw some of the greatest gains during this period. And so what was happening was, while people were saying, hey, all you got to do is put your money in ETFs, stocks, bonds to be able to get yourself out of this situation, what they aren't acknowledging is this was also a pretty big bull market, meaning your retirement account was having some significant growth during this period. So it gave you the confidence to be able to go, you know what? I've got $500,000-$600,000 inside my 401k. I can absolutely put myself in a position to where I can focus on transitioning, take 50% of what it is I've saved. Take 50% of what it is I've made and put that in a position to be able to build more wealth for me. But then what happened? Then all of a sudden, COVID came along. And what happened was, because COVID came along, COVID did a few different things. One, there was a market dip. But in addition to that, what COVID did was it took people out of their corporate workspace and put them back at home. And because they were sitting at home, it became less about getting rid of the corporate handcuffs because, hey, I'm already at home. Actually, I don't want to necessarily fire my job at the moment. So the intensity around getting rid of this excess shifted because that excess was almost taken from us from the fact that we were stuck at home from this point for a significant period of time. And so what happened was this bull market made a lot of people a lot of money. But then COVID came along, and what came after COVID was inflation, which means there was a significant dip in the market. And that dip in the market impacted those who had already jumped into this space of the FIRE method. It impacted their ability to sustain that income that they were taking. And so people shifted, their focus shifted, their perspective shifted. Why? Because again, I go back to, where's the machine? There was no machine created that could sustain their lifestyle. And so it forced people to then rethink what that approach would be. And so therefore so now the social media is filled with, hey, I was doing the FIRE method. I was having great success, but you know what? It's not for me anymore. The FIRE method is dead. Why is that? And it all ends up being related to, where did you have your money? What were you focused on? How were you generating wealth? How were you creating your WTF moment? What was your money doing for you? And the reason I share all of this is because we are in the midst of this today. we're not done with whatever these challenges are going to be as it relates economically, and whether we're talking about shifting over to a digital currency or whatever the case may be. So, are we prepared? What are we doing right now to make sure that when this situation occurs again, we're in a better position to be able to pivot? I'm a actual fan of FIRE. My issue is not FIRE. It isn't financial independence, retire early. That's not the issue. The issue is how. Like, let's be clear as to how. And as I broke down earlier on the steps, the how consists of this word invest. I don't care what you invest in, but because you're using the word invest, that inquires, at least that implies to me, risk. So if you're looking to accomplish something that's going to allow you to be able to sustain your lifestyle for a long period of time, we have to shift the word from invest to save. We have to shift the term from aggressive to slow and steady. Because how do you achieve compound interest? How does your money make money, and the money that your money makes more money? Is it by crypto? Like, is it by whatever the hottest thing is today? Like, what is it? And so, what's required of the individual who is wanting to participate in an environment like this? And again, this is not rocket science. It requires planning, it requires discipline, and again, there's that word again. It requires investing wisely. Again, from a FIRE perspective, it involves investing wisely. Well, again, this the word investing implies risk. So it's investing wisely tells me, hey, reduce the risk where possible. Well, if the vehicles that you're told to invest in are index funds, mutual funds, stocks, crypto, and real estate, how do you eliminate and or reduce that risk as it relates to an investment? And ultimately, here's what I'm talking about, because we've shared this many times. The equation that's being used in this method is related to trying to eliminate this risk. Again, attempting to eliminate this risk, meaning I'm paying myself first. I'm starting today. I'm putting my money in somewhere secure, but there's risk involved. I'm compounding my money, and hopefully there's leverage being used so that I can build and generate wealth. Well, what happens when you place your money in a vehicle like this is there are wins and losses. And the average of wins and losses are a straight line. The real objective is, can you place your money in a vehicle that can allow you to reduce, if not eliminate, that risk? That's the question. The purpose of sharing this, meaning what's required of you as it relates to the FIRE method. What's missing here is the how. How? Like, I get it. Planning. Yes, you need to know your number. I get it. Discipline. Hey, you have to stay consistent in saving. Yep, I understand that. Investing wisely. Like, what does that mean? And if you're telling me these are the vehicles, then how do I make sure these vehicles are putting my money in a position to where it can generate income on a consistent basis through these different downturns, these different laws that are going to happen through inflation? And I think what's interesting is, and that's kind of what brings us to this next slide. What's interesting is, since COVID, FIRE has evolved, because what they've identified is, you know what, this is not a one size fits all process. And so there are different, there are varying degrees of this FIRE movement. And I'll call it the three main areas is, there's the fat FIRE method, there's the lean FIRE method, and then there's the barista FIRE method. Now there's others, but these are the three main. And what this is saying is, from a I'll call it a fat FIRE method. It's your objective is, I want to maintain my current lifestyle, meaning I make $120,000 a year. When I fire my job, I need to continue making $100,000 a year. So I am not willing to all of a sudden transition to beans and rice just so I can fire my job. So the fat FIRE method is the thought process behind that is being able to sustain your lifestyle. The lean FIRE method is around being a minimalist. That is where the beans and rice comes into play. That is where, you know what, I am going to put away 50 to 70% of my income into these vehicles that can generate wealth for me, so that I can get to my FIRE moment as quickly as possible, so I can put all of this behind me and go do what I love and be with my family and raise my kids and all of those things. And so I am willing to live off the beans and rice in order to accomplish that, because ultimately I only need $25,000 a year to be able to sustain my lifestyle. Why? I've paid off my home. I'm debt free. I've done the baby steps. This is where, because I don't know if you guys realize it, but Dave Ramsey is all up and around through all of this. And so the thought process is that lean fire method is I am a minimalist and I grow my own food maybe. And so therefore there's very little that I need to live off. My favorite though is the Barista FIRE. And I know I know several people who are in this space, meaning they're retired and they no longer work for that corporate industry that they're in, but you might actually find them at Starbucks. Why? They're at Starbucks because Starbucks offers them full benefits, a decent wage, decent time off. So they have a little bit more control over their time. So they have this foundation of security while also living off of the returns from their investments. And so this one is the one that I'd say if you're finding anyone who's successful in this space, 9 times out of 10, this is where they are. In Barista FIRE, meaning they have some type of part-time job or some type of maybe they retired and they're doing what they love. They retired and became a fifth grade teacher. They retired and became a yoga teacher. They retired and became something else other than being handcuffed to this corporate industry, and they've learned how to they no longer have a mortgage, so they've reduced and or almost eliminated their debts, but they have this foundation that they're living on to be able to be successful. My point is, since COVID, FIRE has looked differently because people realize what fits for you may not necessarily fit for me. Hey, based off this age, what do I need to be able to achieve this income? So this is the income that I'm wanting to achieve. This is the age that I am, and this is the amount that I have to have in order to achieve that income. But I go back to, where is the security? What is your responsibility in this process to be able to maintain this vehicle? Because the way it's taught is, and again, his numbers were very, very specific. It was based off 40,000, 100,000, 60,000. Work those numbers backwards. How are you capable of achieving $40,000 in income for the rest of your life? What do you need to have in place in order to achieve $40,000 for the rest of your life? Well, the way you calculate that number is you take that number and you divide it by 0.04. What's 0.04? 4%. So this is all based off the 4% rule. Why? Because the vehicles that you're placing your money in all are impacted by the market, which means you are not eliminating risk. And so if you are not eliminating risk, regardless of what this number is, it is very difficult to sustain because you don't have the vehicle or the mechanism in place to be able to do it. And I go back to this piece. What we're talking about is the investment equation, meaning, yes, you can pay yourself first. Yes, you can do it today. Yes, you can put it in a vehicle that is somewhat secure. But the question is, can you eliminate the risk? Can you reduce or eliminate the risk so that you can absolutely generate wealth? Because by eliminating the risk, that's what you're able to do. Whereas the FIRE method just does not educate or teach it that way. And again, this is the same, or I'm calling it similar, meaning based off the income that you're wanting to achieve, what needs to be in your net worth, meaning how much do you need to have, and what is that safe withdrawal rate in order for you to be able to execute, or what is that rate of return that you're receiving on this dollar amount to be able to achieve as well. There's a few different ways of looking at this, but the moral of the story is, if I'm looking to have, let's call it $5,000 in income, and I've got $1.2 million in net worth, then what is that monthly, what is that safe withdrawal rate that I would need in order to be able to achieve my goal? So again, this is all speaking in the same language. These are three different, I'll call it three different visuals, but they all speak the same language. And that is, hey, based off the risk that I've taken in the market where my money is sitting, can I sustain my lifestyle? This kind of speaks to the how. What ends up happening is, as you're putting your money away, as you're making the efforts to save what it is you need to save to be able to achieve your goal, the question is, hey, is this vehicle that I'm putting my money in functioning efficiently enough for me? And that's where crypto kind of eases its way into this discussion, because everyone is looking for that immediate fix. Like, what is going to get me to my goal fastest? Not realizing that, you know what? Compound interest is not sexy. Compound interest is not fast. There is not anything that you can put your money in that's going to immediately help you hit your goal tomorrow. Because again, what are the vehicles? We're talking index funds, ETFs, crypto, and 10 to 12 rentals. 10 to 12 rentals is the thought process. Again, I don't care whose YouTube video you watch or what subject you read as it relates to the FIRE method, they all speak the same language. How do you hit this goal? How do you get to this point where you can achieve your FIRE method end game? And it is in these vehicles. So what they're saying is, hey, you need to become a day trader, or you need to transition that job that you did have with corporate America and transition over to becoming a real estate investor. Because I don't know how many people expect to be able to have 10 to 12 rentals and not be 100%, I'll call it, involved in that process, whether you're paying a management company or not. I think the biggest piece that I take away from this visual is the risk. I go back to risk. Is it possible to be successful in this environment? Is it possible to use the FIRE method in its bare form to be successful? Yes. Are there people who have done it? Yes. Like I'm not saying that this is that no one can be successful in this process. My point is simply the risk part. If we're talking about a machine that's going to sustain your lifestyle forever, you need to also make sure you are accounting for variables that people tend to miss in this process. And so what ultimately ends up happening is it's leverage without safety, without security. It's, yes, I have my money in this vehicle. Yes, I'm successful in generating wealth during this bull market. But what happens when the bull market takes a hit? What happens when the situation changes? And so kind of how it starts with when we kind of watch some of those videos related to the fire method is dead. We're leaving the FIRE method. We're transitioning away from the FIRE method. What we learned was what we thought was freedom ended up being no freedom, not having any options, and not having any security. And so why? Like what was those, what was the impact, or what were the things impacting the ability to be able to have those things? Well, it started here with, you know what? When I got into this FIRE method, what I learned was I didn't actually put myself in a position to where I could have no job. What ended up happening is I became paranoid around the fact that, hey, my money is tied up in the market. So therefore, I do have to pay close attention on a daily, if not hourly basis to make sure that the nest egg that I have can sustain me through. Oh, in addition to that, maybe there are other vehicles like, hey, I've got my first rental. I've got, my first renter in it. And am I structured properly to be able to make sure that regardless of what the laws are, am I in a position such that this renter can impact my ability for being able to sustain this lifestyle? And so what ends up being learned as you kind of walk through these different dissertations is my hours actually became longer. I actually ended up causing more work for me, less freedom, and my ability to sustain became impacted.
If this was the whole point of sacrificing all 50% of your income, you were living on a tight budget so that you could retire early, not so that you could feel like you were barely surviving. And to your point around having to start a job where they thought, they just assumed, oh, well, we can just start a business, not realizing that that was worse than the job that they were running from, way worse. And now they're thinking, well, what are our options? We need to downsize again. Well, we can't unless we sell the house that we're in, which now the market's different. We're not buying at the same house anymore. Now we're buying a smaller house for the same price our house is unless we relocate. Okay, let's relocate. We can't qualify for a loan, so we are forced to use cash only, which to some people are like, yes, no debt. I don't want to go into debt. I don't want to have to make payments. But what they realized is they're losing all of their leverage, their ability to leverage, because they can't qualify if they needed to. If their car broke down and they needed to get a new one and they can't access that, they got to liquidate something. That sucks. So now they're talking about capital gains taxes and other penalties that they're going to have to pay. And they're going, we did not understand what position we were going to end up in once life started lifing.
Right. And I think the key is this does work. Because I think as you peel these layers back, I think we speak about the same things. It's just the piece is the security part. That's, if you don't walk away with anything else, it's not that FIRE doesn't work. It's that FIRE without security doesn't work. It's the lack of security, because it's the security piece that allows you to sustain. Just because you have enough to be able to get you through these first 10 years, that's awesome. What about the second? And what about the impact on inflation on your ability to be able to sustain that lifestyle? If the vehicle, if the machine that you put in place isn't capable of keeping up, that's where people end up getting themselves in trouble. And again, this process started here, which means, okay, if let's call this $85,000, $85,000 in 2010. So if you're in the midst of this bull market and you're making all this sorts of money, and you're putting away 50% of your income to be able to produce a vehicle that can help sustain the however long you plan on being retired, the issue is being able to compensate for the fact that, you know what, $85,000 in 2010 looked more like $120,000 in 2020. And so if you're in this space and you're focused on achieving your FIRE method, then what does that dollar amount need to look like that you're focused on? So when you say know your numbers, do you really understand the layers behind those numbers to understand what it is you actually need to shoot for? Or are you just focused on, hey, I make $120,000 today, I want to make $120,000 tomorrow? Well, $120,000 tomorrow means there's a significant deficit between what you currently have and what you actually need to be able to sustain your lifestyle. And okay, let's say you cut it in half, meaning I don't need $120,000 to live. I only need half that, meaning I have whatever the equivalent of $60,000 is in the future. Well, the equivalent of $60,000 in the future is still $180,000. And again, I go back to, if the objective is to be able to sustain, then what is the vehicle that's going to help get you there? What is the machine that's going to help sustain getting you there? Because just getting there is one leg of the journey. Now you have to sustain through the ups and downs, through the different presidents, through what Elon Musk does or doesn't do. Like, what is the vehicle that's going to allow you to be able to sustain? And I think that's the piece. And so what it ends up being, what we end up talking about, and again, we talk about this a lot here on this channel, it's about leverage. It's about leverage and security. Again, the thought process is, where does the leverage come from? And so what I wanted to highlight, though, is just going back to the steps. Like, how do we fix the steps? Like, if these are the steps, what are some of those actions that can be taken to be able to address this issue? We talk about this often. Knowing your numbers is just that, but it's not just knowing your numbers, it's knowing your numbers and the impact of inflation. So what is the action you can take? It is not just understanding, yes, I need to understand what my numbers are. I need to fill out my form so that I know what's coming in, what's coming out, what's my cash flow, and where I'm going to put it. But it's not just knowing your numbers, it's the impact on inflation as well. And then in addition to that, it's not just save aggressively, but it's save versus invest. Meaning, where are you putting your money? If it's save versus invest, where specifically is your money going at this moment? And what's the risk of you losing what it is you have? How sustainable is this machine? Am I putting my money at risk, or am I putting my money in a position to where there is at least some guarantee to reduce the amount of risk that I have with the money that I'm contributing? And then it's actually budget. It's not just live below your means, but it's, what is the budget? What is the objective? Let's be specific. Let's use the actual numbers, not just live under your means and reduce your expenses, but from a velocity banking perspective, what's the goal? Where are we trying to get to? What is that number we're trying to achieve? And how are we using leverage? How are we using our home? How are we leveraging our the company that we work for, the business that we work for? How are we leveraging all of those vehicles that we have to be able to do so? And then the last one being aggressively invest. How about slow, steady, and secure growth? Meaning putting your money in a vehicle to where not only are you building compound interest, you're building that compound interest securely. And not just securely, there's leverage also added to this process to where it exponentially grows your dollar amount, which means you're building secure growth without the impact or the concern of who might be president at the time or where the market is or isn't. And again, I'm not saying this is one size fits all. I'm saying, in addition to what you're already doing, do you have a vehicle that you can put your money in that can help sustain your lifestyle? Here's the truth as it relates to FIRE method, at least. what is that percentage of people who actually accomplish this? Because again, I'm not saying that you cannot be successful with the FIRE method, but let's look at the math. What does the math say? The math says those who actually retire early between the ages of 40 and 50 are very low. We're talking somewhere around 1% of Americans actually retire between the age of 40 and 50. That doesn't mean it can't happen. It just means that when you're doing the math on how to determine what that process should be for you, what those steps should be that you should take, as you're identifying how to generate and or build wealth, just understand the math around if you're not putting your money in a vehicle that, one, even if you are able to retire between the age of 40 and 50, if you're using a traditional retirement account, what's going to be that impact as it relates to tax and penalty? Are you putting your money in a vehicle where you can? Real estate, absolutely, you can retire early in a vehicle like real estate, but it's just understanding what do the statistics say? And if you're between the ages of 50 and 55, only 3.5% of Americans actually retire early with the, hitting their FIRE method or whatever the case may be. And then the 15 to 60, 55 to 60, during the 55 to 60 age, there's about 13% of Americans that actually hit there. Majority of us end up in this space. So it's not that it can't be done. It's just being realistic around what is that vehicle, what is that tool that you're using to be able to actually get you there. And what it ultimately boils down to, the how do you go about it? It is absolutely reducing the risk. It is putting your money in a position to where not just you can pay yourself first, but you can immediately start today and putting your money in a position to where you can reduce and or eliminate that risk. You compound the money that you have, and then you place it in a position to where you can exponentially grow it. But what are those vehicles that actually will allow you to do that? What are those vehicles that, where are those vehicles, or what are those vehicles that you can put your money in a position so that you can accomplish these goals? What are they? And that's where we go back to the risk return pyramid. Again, from a FIRE method perspective, most of the opportunities around achieving that wealth over time is related in this area. And what that means is as you move up this pyramid, the risk becomes greater. As you move down this pyramid, the security gets greater. So if you're focused on real estate, stocks, mutual funds, crypto's actually up here. But the bottom line is you're in a space where it's just not designed for security. I'm not saying it can't be. I'm not saying you can't find a real estate opportunity that won't, I'll call it, put your money at risk. I'm not saying that's not possible. I'm just saying in general, the areas where your money is sitting, if the goal is to be able to sustain your lifestyle, then is there an opportunity to be able to place your money in a better secure position to be able to do so? And what we're ultimately talking about is the difference between traditional investing compared to non-traditional investing. Meaning, what are those vehicles that will allow you to have a bit more security around the dollars that you have and get your money out of the casino, get your money out of the market that is impacting your ability to be able to grow? And if we can identify those things, we can actually absolutely hit that FIRE number or that FIRE objective, whatever it would be. And so again, what we wanted to do today was just highlight some of the opportunities, some of the challenges as it relates to the FIRE method and impacting people's ability to be able to hit their FIRE method, hit their goal. But the piece beyond that, the layer beyond that is, then what do you do? Like, what actions do you take? Like, how do you solve it? How do you fix it? Lacking security is impacting people's ability to be able to sustain their lifestyle for long periods of time. Then how do you put your money in a position so that you can sustain that longevity? And that's kind of the objective on the second half.